When we create directives in AngularJS, some of them will require functionality specific only to that directive, and some of them will contain functionality that should be shared with other directives. When this is the case, Angular allows us to create dedicated controllers for our directive using the controller property. In this video, we will learn how to add a controller to a directive in AngularJS. So I have a standard application module that's attached to my HTML document, and I also have a main application controller off of a div inside the body called main controller. And I'm using scope syntax for simplicity. I also have a directive defined off of my application called test vehicle view, and it's returning a simple directive that has a isolate scope that's two-way data binding to an item property, and it's also implementing a template URL and restricting to arguments and elements. The template is a simple unordered list that is data binding to an item that is expecting a year, make, model, and price, and I'm also using a filter to define the price or display the price nicely. Finally, I have a button that is going to implement an ng-click and fire a save item method. So the first step is to create a controller off of my directive. So I'll do that now, create a controller property, and I'm going to create a constructor function that injects the scope. Now that I have my controller, I'm going to create some elements within that controller. I'm going to first create a scope.message and default it to an empty string. Then I'm going to create a scope.saveItem, and that is what my template URL is calling, which we saw previously. Now this is going to use some business logic in order to determine what the message will say. If it's the first time and there's no message created, then I'm going to say item saved. Otherwise, I'm going to say, if there is a message that exists, I'm going to say item saved again. And we'll see that in a bit. And then the final step is to go to our user interface and implement our directive. So I have a div tag. I'm using the attribute syntax, and I'm attaching a first and second item to my directive. So before it will work, I also need to implement my data in my controller. So I'm going to do that, and I just have two data items that are model data for cars. And so as you can see, I have two directives that have been implemented, and if I click the save, as you can see, it says item saved, and then if I click again, it says item saved again, and these two directives are working independently. And so for every directive that is instantiated, it gets an associated controller, and I can attach variables and methods off of that controller and access it through my template. So in this case, the item is being sent from the directive instantiation. This is being bound to my controller scope. And finally, that's being sent to my template and attached through item.year, make, model, and price. And it's also connecting from the template to call my method off of the controller. So that is how to implement controllers with directives.